How can one moment change everything you thought you controlled? What happens when you ask for space, only to have your biggest secret handed to you in a bright red envelope before you've even had time to breathe? The day I took off my ring to think, I never imagined my own husband would serve me with divorce papers, evidence and all, in front of my entire family. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The kitchen felt smaller than usual that Tuesday morning. I stood at the counter, my fingers trembling as I twisted my wedding ring around and around, watching Caleb pour his coffee with the same methodical precision he'd used for 8 years of marriage. The morning light caught the gold band, making it gleam mockingly at me. "I need some space," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Caleb's hand froze mid-pour. Coffee dripped onto the counter, forming a small brown puddle that neither of us moved to clean. He set the pot down carefully and turned to face me, his dark eyes searching my face with that intense way he had of looking at people, like he could see straight through to their soul. "Space," he repeated, his voice quiet but strained. "Vesper, what are you talking about? We just got back from that weekend in the mountains. I thought we had a good time." My stomach twisted with guilt, but I pushed it down. This was necessary. This was the only way I could figure out what I really wanted. "It's not about the weekend, Caleb. It's about everything. Us. This marriage. I feel like I'm suffocating." The word hung in the air between us like a blade. I watched his face crumple slightly, then rebuild itself into that careful mask he wore when he was trying not to show how much something hurt him. "Suffocating?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand. We've been together for 10 years, married for 8. We have Ava. We have this house, our life together. What's changed?" "Everything," I wanted to scream. "Everything changed 3 months ago, when Eli Torres started working in my department at the insurance office. Everything changed when he smiled at me during that first team meeting and made me remember what it felt like to feel alive, desired, interesting. Everything changed when I realized I'd been sleepwalking through my life with Caleb, going through the motions of being a wife and mother without actually living. But I couldn't say any of that. Instead, I turned away from him and gripped the edge of the counter. "You wouldn't understand. You're always so controlled, so sure of everything. You never question anything, never wonder if there's more to life than this routine we've built. That routine is our life, Vesper. Our family." His voice was getting stronger now, more desperate. "If something's wrong, we can fix it. We can go to counseling, take another trip, whatever you need. But don't ask me for space. Not like this." I felt the familiar surge of irritation that had been plaguing me for months. This was exactly what I was talking about. His need to fix everything, to control the situation, to make decisions for both of us without ever asking what I actually wanted. "See? This is what I mean," I said, spinning around to face him. "You're already trying to manage this, trying to tell me what we should do instead of just listening to what I'm saying. I need time to think, Caleb. I need to figure out who I am outside of being your wife and Ava's mother." His face went pale. "Who you are? Vesper, you're an insurance claims adjuster. You're brilliant at your job. You're a wonderful mother. You're the woman I fell in love with in college, the one who used to stay up all night talking about books and dreams and—" "That woman is gone," I interrupted, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "She died somewhere between mortgage payments and parent-teacher conferences and 8 years of the same conversations over the same dinner table." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Ava moving around upstairs, getting ready for school, blissfully unaware that her parents' marriage was imploding in the kitchen below. The thought of our 7-year-old daughter made my chest tighten, but I pushed that feeling away too. This wasn't about Ava. This was about me, about what I needed. "How long?" Caleb asked finally. "How long do you need?" I hadn't expected him to give in so easily. Part of me had been prepared for a fight, for him to argue and demand explanations I wasn't ready to give. His quiet acceptance somehow made me feel worse. "I don't know," I said honestly. "A few weeks, maybe a month. I just need to clear my head. He nodded slowly, like he was processing information in that analytical way of his. And what does that look like exactly? Are you moving out? Am I? What do we tell Ava? The practical questions hit me like cold water. I hadn't thought this through, hadn't planned beyond the moment of asking for space. I'd been so focused on creating room for whatever was happening between Eli and me that I hadn't considered the logistics of actually dismantling my life. I'll stay at my mum's for a while, I said, making the decision as I spoke. We can tell Ava that Mommy needs to take care of Grandma Karen for a little bit. She'll understand. Caleb's jaw tightened. You want me to lie to our daughter? I want you to protect our daughter from adult problems she's too young to understand, I shot back. Unless you'd prefer to explain to a 7-year-old that Mommy isn't sure she wants to be married to Daddy anymore. The cruelty of my words hit their mark. Caleb flinched like I'd slapped him, and for a moment I almost took it back. Almost. But then I remembered the way Eli had looked at me yesterday, when we'd grabbed coffee after the quarterly meeting. The way he'd leaned in close and told me I was too interesting to be wasted on suburban life. The way he'd made me feel like I was worth paying attention to. Fine, Caleb said quietly, if that's what you need. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. I'd expected more of a fight, more emotion. His calm acceptance felt like rejection, like he didn't care enough about our marriage to fight for it. Just like that, I asked, you're not even going to try to change my mind? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, something that looked almost like resignation. Would it work if I tried? The question hung between us, loaded with 8 years of accumulated disappointments and unspoken resentments. I wanted to say yes, wanted to tell him that of course he could change my mind, that all I needed was for him to fight for us. But that would have been a lie, and we both knew it. Instead, I slowly pulled my wedding ring off my finger. The metal was warm from my skin, and for a moment I hesitated. 8 years of marriage, 10 years together, a daughter who adored both of us, a life we'd built together, imperfect, but real. Then I thought about Eli's hands, about the way he'd touched my arm yesterday when he'd walked me to my car, about the text message he'd sent me last night. Can't stop thinking about our conversation. When can we talk more? I set the ring on the counter between us. The small click it made against the granite seemed impossibly loud. Caleb stared at it like it was a live grenade. I'll pack a bag after I drop Ava at school, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll call you tonight to check in. He nodded without looking up from the ring. Okay. I waited for him to say something else, to make one last attempt to stop me. When he didn't, I grabbed my purse and keys and headed for the garage, calling up to Ava that it was time to leave for school. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Caleb through the kitchen window, still standing exactly where I'd left him, staring down at my wedding ring on the counter. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if I was making a terrible mistake? What if I was throwing away something precious for a fantasy that would never materialize? But then my phone buzzed with a text from Eli. Good morning, beautiful. Hope you have a wonderful day. I smiled despite everything and quickly typed back. It worked. I asked for space. We need to talk. His response came immediately. My place tonight. I'll cook. The flutter of excitement in my stomach chased away any lingering doubts. This was what I needed. This was what I deserved. A chance to feel alive again, to remember who I was before I became half of someone else. I dropped Ava at school with extra hugs and promises to see her soon, then drove to work with my phone, buzzing with increasingly flirtatious texts from Eli. By the time I pulled into the office parking lot, I felt lighter than I had in months. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, my carefully constructed world would come crashing down around me. The insurance office buzzed with its usual Tuesday morning energy. I settled into my cubicle, trying to focus on the stack of claims waiting for my review, but my mind kept drifting to the ring-shaped indent still visible on my finger, and the text conversation with Eli that had continued throughout my drive to work. You look different today, said Jessica from the neighboring cubicle. She peered over the partition that separated our workspaces, her sharp eyes taking in details I hoped weren't obvious. Liked her somehow. Good weekend? Just feeling refreshed, I replied, forcing myself to sound casual. Sometimes you need a change of perspective, you know. Jessica nodded knowingly. She was divorced, had been for 3 years, and often made comments about the freedom of single life that I'd never paid much attention to before. Now I found myself wondering if she'd felt the same mixture of terror and excitement when she decided to leave her husband. Vesper, the voice made me turn around quickly, my heart jumping. Eli stood behind my chair, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing that smile that had been haunting my thoughts for weeks. Thought you might need some caffeine. You seemed tired yesterday after that marathon meeting. I accepted the coffee gratefully, very aware of Jessica's interested gaze. Thanks. That's really thoughtful. Just looking out for my favorite coworker, he said, his voice carrying a warmth that made my cheeks flush. Mind if we go over those Martinez files together later? I could use your expertise on the property damage assessment. Of course, I managed, hoping my voice sounded more professional than I felt. Whatever you need. He lingered for a moment longer than necessary, and I caught a hint of his cologne, something woodsy and masculine that was completely different from Caleb's practical, unscented deodorant. When he finally walked away, I realized I'd been holding my breath. He's cute, Jessica said quietly, settling back into her chair. Single too, from what I hear. Is he? I tried to sound mildly interested rather than desperately curious. I hadn't really noticed. Jessica snorted. Right, and I hadn't noticed that he's been finding excuses to come talk to you at least 3 times a day for the past month. My stomach dropped. If Jessica had noticed, who else had? I forced myself to laugh. Don't be ridiculous. We work on a lot of the same cases. It's purely professional. Uh-huh. Jessica's tone was skeptical but not unkind. Just be careful, Vesper. Office romances can get complicated, especially when one person is married. The word married hit me like a physical blow. Technically, I was still married. The ring might be sitting on my kitchen counter, but the legal reality hadn't changed. The realization made me feel suddenly exposed, like everyone in the office could see exactly what I was thinking. There's no office romance, I said firmly. Eli is a colleague. A friend, maybe. That's all. But even as I said it, I was thinking about tonight, about his invitation to dinner at his apartment, about the way he'd looked at me when he'd said he couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. The morning passed slowly. I threw myself into work, reviewing claims and making phone calls, but I kept catching myself checking my phone for messages from Eli. Around 11, my mother called. Vesper, honey, is everything okay? Caleb called me this morning, asking if I had room for you to stay for a while. He sounded strange. I stepped outside to take the call, finding a quiet spot near the loading dock where I couldn't be overheard. Everything's fine, Mum. I just need some space to think about things. Space to think about what things? Karen Lyle had never been one to accept vague explanations. Are you and Caleb having problems? It's complicated, I said, which was both true and completely inadequate. I just need some time to figure out what I want. Can I stay with you for a few weeks? There was a long pause. Of course you can stay with me. You're my daughter. But Vesper, marriage isn't something you just walk away from when it gets difficult. You have responsibilities. You have Ava to think about. I am thinking about Ava, I said, though the words felt hollow. I'm thinking about what kind of mother I can be if I'm not happy, if I'm not living authentically. Living authentically? Mom's voice sharpened. What kind of psychology textbook nonsense is that? You made vows, Vesper. You promised to love that man in good times and bad. You don't just get to decide you need to find yourself when things get routine. Her words stung because they echoed the doubts I'd been trying to suppress. But they also made me angry. Why was it that everyone expected me to just accept being unhappy? Why was I supposed to sacrifice my own needs for everyone else's comfort? I have to go, Mom. I'll be there tonight with a suitcase. Vesper. I hung up before she could finish whatever lecture she'd been preparing. My hands were shaking as I walked back into the building, and I nearly collided with Eli in the hallway. Whoa, careful there, he said, steadying me with his hands on my shoulders. "You look upset. Everything okay?" The concern in his voice, the gentle way he was touching me, nearly undid me completely. I wanted to collapse into his arms and tell him everything, about Caleb's hurt expression, about my mother's disapproval, about the terrifying uncertainty of not knowing what I was doing with my life. "Just family stuff," I said instead. "Nothing I can't handle." "You sure? Because if you need to talk, I'm a pretty good listener." His thumb brushed against my shoulder, a gesture so small and intimate that it made my breath catch. "Tonight, maybe? Over dinner?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The simple touch, the offer of comfort, felt like exactly what I needed. Someone who wanted to take care of me, who was interested in my problems, who made me feel like I mattered. "Good," he said, his smile warming me from the inside out. "I'll text you my address." The rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. I found myself checking my reflection in every reflective surface, wondering if I looked like a woman on the verge of an affair, wondering if I looked guilty. At 5:30, I was packing up my desk when my phone rang. Caleb's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Hi." His voice was carefully neutral. "I just wanted to check in, see how your day was." "Fine, busy. You know how it is." I glanced around the office, making sure no one was listening. "How was Ava when you picked her up from school?" "Confused. She asked why you weren't there, why you won't be home for dinner. I told her you were helping Grandma Karen with some things, like we discussed." The guilt hit me fresh and sharp. Ava always looked forward to telling me about her school day, to getting help with homework at the kitchen table while I made dinner. Tonight she'd have to settle for Caleb's distracted attention and probably take out pizza. "I'll call her tonight," I promised, "after she's done with homework." "She'd like that." There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "Vesper, are you sure about this? About needing space? Because if there's something specific that's wrong, something I've done or not done, we can work on it together." The earnestness in his voice made my chest ache. This would be so much easier if he were angry, if he were demanding or controlling. His willingness to take responsibility, to fix whatever was broken, only made me feel worse about what I was doing. "It's not about anything you've done wrong," I said, and that was true mostly. "It's about me, about figuring out who I am and what I want. And you can't figure that out while living with your husband and daughter." The question was fair, and I didn't have a good answer for it. How could I explain that being around him made it impossible to think clearly? That his steady, reliable presence was exactly what felt suffocating? That I needed distance from our life together to figure out if I actually wanted it? "I just need some time," I said finally. "Please try to understand." Another pause. "Okay, I'm trying. I love you, Vesper. Whatever you need to figure out, that's not going to change." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "I know," I whispered. "I love you too." But even as I said it, I was thinking about Eli waiting for me, about the evening ahead of us, about the possibility of feeling something other than this grinding dissatisfaction that had become my constant companion. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at Eli's address on my phone screen. I could still go home. I could walk back into that kitchen, put my ring back on, and pretend this morning had never happened. I could try harder to be grateful for what I had, instead of longing for what I didn't. But then I thought about Caleb's careful, controlled voice on the phone, about the way he'd accepted my request for space without really fighting for me, about 8 more years of the same conversations, the same routines, the same slow suffocation of everything that made me feel alive. I started the car and drove toward Eli's apartment, toward whatever was waiting for me there. I told myself I was just having dinner with a friend, just talking through my problems with someone who understood. I told myself I wasn't crossing any lines that couldn't be uncrossed. I had no idea that while I was driving toward what I thought was freedom, Caleb was at home staring at my wedding ring and making phone calls of his own. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in Romano's, the Italian restaurant where both our families had celebrated every major milestone for the past 5 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, in the middle of destroying my marriage, surrounded by the people who had witnessed Caleb and me promise to love each other forever. The dinner had been my mother's idea, though she claimed it came from Marianne, Caleb's mother. "Family dinner," she'd said when she called me at the office that afternoon. "Both families, tonight at 7. Marianne thinks it would be good for everyone to get together, show Ava that everything's normal." Normal. The word had made me laugh bitterly. Nothing about the past 3 days had been normal. I'd been staying at my mother's house, sleeping in my childhood bedroom with its faded purple walls and dusty stuffed animals, while conducting an increasingly intense emotional affair with Eli via text message and stolen moments at work. We hadn't slept together yet, hadn't even kissed, but the tension between us was building to something inevitable. He'd made dinner for me that first night, and we'd talked until nearly midnight about dreams and disappointments, about feeling trapped in lives that didn't fit us anymore. He'd understood in a way that Caleb never had, never could. "You look tired, sweetheart," my mother said, settling into the chair beside me. She'd arrived early, as had Marianne and Caleb's brother Jared. The three of them had been making stilted conversation while we waited for Caleb and Ava to arrive. "I'm fine," I said automatically, just adjusting to the new routine. Marianne Alloway looked up from her menu, her sharp blue eyes, so much like Caleb's, studying my face with obvious disapproval. She'd never been particularly warm toward me, but tonight there was an edge to her coolness that made me uncomfortable. "New routine," she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes, Caleb mentioned you needed some time to think. How's that going for you?" The question was loaded with judgment, and I felt my defenses rise. "It's going well, thank you. Sometimes a little distance provides clarity." "Clarity about what exactly?" Jared asked. Unlike his mother, Caleb's older brother had always been kind to me, which made his current skeptical tone more cutting than Marianne's open hostility. Before I could answer, Caleb and Ava arrived. My daughter launched herself at me with the enthusiasm of a child who hadn't seen her mother in days, and I felt the familiar stab of guilt that had been my constant companion since Tuesday morning. "Mommy, I missed you so much. Daddy said you're helping Grandma Karen, but she looks fine to me." Ava's 7-year-old logic was, as always, uncomfortably accurate. "I missed you too, baby," I said, hugging her tightly and breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Grandma Karen needed help with some boring grown-up stuff, but I'm here now." Caleb took the seat across from me, and I was struck by how exhausted he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually neat hair was disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. He'd lost weight too, I realized. His button-down shirt hung loose around his shoulders. "Hi," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine briefly before looking away. "Hi," I replied, feeling suddenly awkward. 3 days ago, this man had been my husband, the person I shared everything with. Now he felt like a stranger. The server came to take our drink orders, and I found myself asking for wine despite the early hour. I needed something to dull the sharp edges of this surreal family gathering. "So," my sister Gina said, arriving fashionably late and sliding into the empty chair beside Jared, "what's the occasion? It's not anyone's birthday, is it?" Gina was 4 years younger than me and had always been the more outspoken of the two of us. She worked as a graphic designer, lived in a trendy downtown loft, and had never made any secret of her opinion that I'd settled too young for suburban domesticity. "Just thought it would be nice to get everyone together," Mom said quickly. "We don't do this enough." "Uh-huh." Gina's dark eyes, a mirror of my own, took in the tension around the table with obvious curiosity. "And it has nothing to do with the fact that Vesper's been staying with Mom for the past 3 days." The silence that followed was deafening. Ava looked confused, glancing between the adults with the instinctive awareness children have when something is wrong, but no one will explain what. "Gina," Mom said warningly. "What? I'm just saying, if we're going to have a family meeting, maybe we should actually talk about what's going on instead of pretending everything's fine." Gina leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "So, what's the deal? Are you guys getting divorced or what?" "Gina!" Mom's voice was sharp with embarrassment, but Ava had gone very still beside me, her small hand gripping mine tightly. Divorced, she whispered. Like Emma's parents? The pain on Caleb's face was visible across the table. No, sweetheart, he said gently. Mommy and Daddy aren't getting divorced. We're just working through some things. What kind of things? Ava's voice was small and scared, and I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Grown-up things, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. Nothing for you to worry about, baby. Sometimes mummies and daddies need a little space to figure stuff out, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. But why can't you figure it out at home? Why do you have to stay at Grandma's house? The question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have an answer that wouldn't either lie to my daughter or expose more than I was ready to reveal. Sometimes it's easier to think when you're in a different place, I said finally, hating how weak it sounded. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Gina said bluntly. If you have problems with your husband, you work them out with your husband. You don't run away to Mom's house like you're 16 again. Gina, that's enough, Mom said, but her tone lacked conviction. Is it? Because I'm looking around this table and I see a man who looks like he hasn't slept in days, a little girl who's scared, her parents are going to split up, and my sister who's acting like this is all perfectly reasonable. Gina's voice was getting louder, drawing glances from other diners. What exactly are you figuring out, Vesper? Whether you want to be married, whether you want to be a mother? Because newsflash, you already made those choices. You don't understand, I said, my own voice rising. You've never been married. You've never had to... Had to what? Honor your commitments? Put someone else's needs before your own? Grow up? Gina's words hit like slaps. You're right, I've never been married, but I've also never made promises I wasn't prepared to keep. That's not fair, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could feel how hollow they sounded. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've decided you're bored with your life, and instead of working to make it better, you're just going to blow it up and see what happens. Gina, please, Caleb said quietly. This isn't helping anyone. But Gina was on a roll now, her voice carrying the righteous anger of someone who'd been holding back her opinions for too long. You know what, Caleb? Maybe someone needs to say this stuff. Maybe someone needs to point out that marriage isn't a trial subscription you can cancel when you get tired of it. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, a mixture of rage and shame, and something that might have been relief. Finally, someone was saying out loud what I'd been afraid everyone was thinking. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice shaking. You have no idea what my marriage has been like, what I've been going through. So tell us, Marianne said suddenly. Her voice was calm but steely, and when I looked at her, I saw Caleb's eyes in her face. The same intensity, the same ability to see through pretense. Tell us what's been so terrible about being married to my son that you had to abandon your family. I didn't abandon anyone, I protested, but the words felt weak even to me. Didn't you? Marianne's voice was getting sharper. You took off your wedding ring, moved out of your house, and left your husband to explain to your daughter why Mummy doesn't want to live with them anymore. What would you call that? I call it taking some time to think about what I want from my life, I said, but I could hear how selfish it sounded. And what you want doesn't include us? Caleb's voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. When I looked at him, his face was carefully blank, but his hands were clenched on the table. Doesn't include Ava? The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course it includes Ava. She's my daughter. I love her more than anything. But not enough to stay, Ava said in a small voice that broke my heart. Not enough to come home. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, moving closer to Caleb. The rejection from my own daughter was more painful than anything the adults had said. It's not about not loving you, I said desperately. It's about loving you enough to make sure I'm the best mommy I can be. And right now, I'm not. Right now, I'm confused and unhappy, and that's not fair to you. So get therapy, Jared said bluntly. Take antidepressants, go on a vacation. Don't blow up your kid's life because you're having a midlife crisis. It's not a midlife crisis, I snapped, though even as I said it, I wondered if that's exactly what it was. Then what is it? Mom asked. Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the disappointment underneath. Help us understand, sweetheart. What's really going on? I looked around the table at all these people who loved me, who wanted to understand, who were begging me to give them a reason that would make sense of what I was doing, and I realized I couldn't. I couldn't tell them about Eli, about the way he made me feel alive and interesting and desired. I couldn't explain that their love felt like a cage, that their expectations felt like chains, that I was suffocating under the weight of being the person they all needed me to be. I just need some time, I said again, knowing how inadequate it sounded. The silence that followed felt final somehow. I could see the exact moment when each of them gave up on getting a real explanation from me. The disappointment in their faces was almost unbearable. Well, Mum said finally, her voice artificially bright, should we order some appetizers? The rest of the dinner passed in stilted conversation and long silences. Ava barely spoke to me, clinging to Caleb instead. Gina made pointed comments about loyalty and commitment. Marianne and Jared treated me with polite coldness. Even Mom seemed distant, hurt by my refusal to confide in her. When the check came, I grabbed it quickly, pulling out my credit card with a flourish that felt more desperate than generous. Dinner's on me, I announced, as if paying for the meal could somehow make up for the pain I was causing everyone. You don't have to do that, Caleb said quietly. I want to, I insisted, signing the receipt with shaking hands. It's the least I can do. As we were gathering our things to leave, a young man in a delivery uniform appeared at our table, holding a large manila envelope. Caleb Alloway, he asked. Caleb looked surprised. That's me. Delivery for you, sir. Sign here, please. I watched Caleb sign for the envelope, noting how his hand trembled slightly. He didn't open it, just tucked it under his arm, but something about the way he held it made my stomach clench with unease. What's that about? I asked as we walked toward the parking lot. I have no idea, he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. We said our goodbyes in the parking lot, awkward hugs and promises to talk soon that felt hollow and forced. Ava clung to me for a long moment, and I breathed in her scent, trying to memorize it. I love you, Mommy, she whispered. I love you too, baby. So much. As I drove back to my mother's house, I tried to push down the guilt and doubt that the evening had stirred up. Everyone was just upset because they didn't understand. Once they saw that I was happier, that I was a better person when I was living authentically, they'd come around. They'd see that this was the right thing for everyone. My phone buzzed with a text from Eli. How was dinner with the family? I typed back quickly. Awful. They don't understand. Can we talk tomorrow? His response came immediately. Of course. You deserve people who support you, not people who try to make you feel guilty for wanting to be happy. The validation felt like a warm blanket, soothing the raw places that dinner had left exposed. This was why I needed space from my family, from Caleb. They were too invested in keeping me in the box they'd built for me to see that I was dying inside it. I had no idea that while I was driving home, feeling justified in my choices, Caleb was sitting in his own car in the restaurant parking lot, opening that manila envelope and staring at photographs that would change everything.